When I was writing my poetry collection, A Museum of Art and Eggs, I was scrolling through random collections of artworks to see if anything spoke to me. The concept for the museum was that the majority of the poems would be ekphrastic in nature, that is, poetry about other forms of art. I broke it up into sections based on different mediums. The visual art section was mostly comprised of paintings. During that search through artworks, I came across this painting, Saint Sebastian by Guido Reni. Despite having a tumultuous history with Catholics and Catholicism, I myself am not Catholic, nor have I ever been. I'm not really up to date on the saints. So I went to Googling about him and discovered that Saint Sebastian is a bit of a queer icon, especially in art history. So let's talk about that today. I want to break down the visual nature of Reni's depiction, look at other artworks of Sebastian, figure out who the guy even was, and finally piece together why this saint has been embraced by the queer community. I would also read you the poem from A Museum of Art and Eggs, but it's a bit too spicy for a video essay. Portrait 1. Reni's Sebastian. The artist Guido Reni painted a handful of portraits of Saint Sebastian. I want to start with the version that I use for inspiration in A Museum of Art and Eggs. This is the one currently at the Capitolini Museums in Rome. Let's really look at this painting and analyze it. Starting with the obvious, Reni's Sebastian is practically nude, including of body hair. He has neither chest hair nor a treasure trail. He lacks a bush both under his arms and in the pubic region. This hairlessness is associated with innocence. People have been manscaping since forever with various connotations and judgments for it. Hair can be seen as unclean, it can be seen as masculine, it can be seen as ugly, it can be seen as the symbol of sex. After all, body hair is the most common physical symptom of sexual maturation. Reni Sebastian is hairless. He's innocent. Tomás Miguel Cabrera Membrera suggests this youthful version of Sebastian is inspired by statues of Apollo and exemplifies a semi-feminine ephebe, or young adult soldier, physically fit, technically young, innocent, and on the brink of destruction. The innocence is further emphasized by the largeness of his eyes and the loose hanging curls of his hair. His nipples are pale and tiny. Look at the pink fullness of his slightly parted lips, as though he's been waiting for you to place a thumb on his mouth, palm on his cheek as you hold him and call him a good boy. He is the picture of submission. His hands are bound over his head. He is the submissive in a BDSM scene where the erotic lies in the combination of innocence and corruption. He has been filled with arrows, and yet there is little blood. Corruption and innocence. Notice the placements of the arrows. There's one in his stretched armpit, one in his ribs, and one right beneath his navel. It provides a typical trail for the kisses you plant on a man, whether you're rising up to his lips or heading down his barely clothed nether region. Isn't this more erotic than if Sebastian were fully nude? The cloth on his waist is loose and falling. It's in the process of revealing. It's on the edge. It adds anticipation to the painting, and anticipation adds to the erotic. You can see the dark line that will end in hanging bits. Symbolically, to be pierced with arrows is to be pierced with the phallic. If you look at the retreating soldiers, those who have just shot this martyr, a story arises. They tied Sebastian up, filled him with their wood, and left. He looks up to the Dom who cares for him, in this case, God, with eyes wondering if he did good. He's tied against a giant tree, a giant piece of standing wood, if you catch my drift. The story of Sebastian is that he survives getting shot with arrows. So this symbolic cuck get-together is safe and good because Sebastian's martyrdom is sacred. Gay submission is sacred. Look at the blood. There's barely any. This is not a real violence. This is BDSM violence, sacred violence. Sexy violence. It is holy to submit to slight harm. There's also this version by Reni, which is much the same but different in some important ways. This is the one you can find in Genoa. What immediately occurs to me in looking at this piece is that this Sebastian seems a few years older than the last one, or at least he's less doll-like and more masculine. His nipples are more defined, his hair is kept closer to his head in tighter curls, his muscles are slightly more defined. You see less soldiers walking away from the scene, but it's clearer to see the man looking back on him. There are 2 rather than 3 arrows, as though the more innocent Sebastian is drawn, the more violence is necessary. This one does not have an arrow in his stomach. There is merely one in his pit and in his ribs. In the version I showed first, it's the stomach arrow that has the clearest blood. This version is less violent in several ways. Something I only noticed when I was looking at this Genoa version, but applies to both, is that there is a hidden shape in the loincloth. It's defined and broad and correctly placed and angled. I'm not sure I can go into much more detail. Sebastian is, let's just say, proud to be submitting to the will of God. Relatable content. Consider this version of Saint Sebastian held at Dulwich Picture Gallery. We see much less of the scene. It's dark, much darker than the others. It's clearly night, and Sebastian is illuminated by some holy light. Though he's clearly a fit, relatively young man, he doesn't carry the exuberant youth of the other options. He's as hairless as ever, and he looks to the heavens still with a begging good boy look, sure, but he's far less innocent than the other 2 versions. His twisted loincloth is practically fallen all the way off. It isn't tied in a suggestive way, but we clearly see more of Sebastian's lower region. His V-lines are more defined. There's more shadow in his crotch, suggesting a potential bush. His arms are not above, casting him in a supreme, innocent, submissive pose, but rather behind. There's only 1 arrow in him. The more grown and masculine Reni depicts Sebastian, the less violence he enacts upon him. Of these 3, which do you find the most erotic, and why? I'd rank them from least to most erotic as the Dulwich, the Genoa, the Roman. Interestingly enough, that's the exact opposite ranking I would give for which I find the most beautiful. As for which I find the most intriguing, or perhaps my ranking of them personally as pieces of art I like, it would go Dulwich, Rome, Genoa, though Genoa would rank above Rome if it had the 3rd arrow. There's something almost grotesque about the Dulwich one, which I'm personally drawn to in art. All of this might make you really uncomfortable. To eroticize innocence, suffering, and violence often makes us uncomfortable because it says uncomfortable things about the nature of desire. Mimbrera specifically discusses Reni's focus on the sensuality of nudity. He and I are by far not the first people to note the erotic elements in Reni's paintings of the saint. Apparently, the main character of Yukio Mishima's novel Confessions of a Mask experiences climax and an awakening to, I believe it's the Genoa version of the painting. It's credited for an armpit fetish. Mishima would, later in his life, recreate the painting in a photograph by Aiko Hosoe. So let's talk about other people's Sebastian. Portrait 2. Mishima's Sebastian. I want to directly compare Mishima's Sebastian to Reni's. I specifically want to compare it to the 2 similar pieces, the one in Genoa and the one in Rome. Mishima's novel interacts with the Genoa version, but it's safe to say, given the 3rd arrow, that he or the photographer found inspiration in the Roman. I want to start visually. I think there are 2 differences that jump out immediately. Hosoe's Mishima as Sebastian is in black and white. Mishima the man has plenty of body hair. It coats his stomach and lines his sternum. It peppers the area around his nipples. He clearly has full pits and the hint of a bush. Mishima is not the innocent youth. We're not looking at youthful innocence defiled. His loincloth does not hang low on his hips and give a bit of suggestion. It is erotically placed, yet unlike the portraits, there's no secret phallus in the loincloth. Mishima's eyes are closed and his head is tilted further back. To me, this gives him a look not of submission, but of ecstasy. He derives pleasure not from the approval of his dom for his submission, but from the act of submission itself. This is a subtle distinction, but a kind of important one. Reni Sebastian submits for the purpose of approval and connection. Mishima as Sebastian submits for the sake of submission. Pain is ecstasy for him. You can also note that Mishima's muscles are more defined and captured in the shadows. The increased darkness adds a bit of the Dalritian version. Each of his 3 arrows clearly leaks blood. The violence is more important in this version than in any of Reni's. The violation, the blood, the violence. In all of Reni's depictions, the arrows are aimed upwards, sending us up toward the heavens and toward God. Reni Sebastian again finds the joy above himself. See how the lines of each arrow leads us to the next and then up to his face, which is turned up toward God. Mishima's is different. The bottom 2 arrows lead us up, but then the third is aimed down. We're either brought off the edge of the photograph or back into the manly fur of his underarm and the leaking blood. That blood, tracing the contours of his chest, leads you to his nipple, which leads you to his sternum, which leads you to his face, which is turned in ecstasy. Though Reni emphasized the sensual, Hossoi's is much more focused on the body and on male sexuality. We can keep doing this. The Reni models are all turned. The Mishima photo is dead on. The turn adds an angle of innocence and eroticism. We can see the curve of Sebastian's ass. There's a modesty to the turn somehow. Mishima being dead on, we don't see his backside at all, but he has his hip cocked to the side. It's as though he's dancing. He's swaying to the ecstasy of masochism. Mishima's lower hand is back instead of in front. That makes it harder to untie him. His upper hand is not innocently hanging, but rather reaching up to the rope as though he wants to feel the texture in his palm. His is much more tactile. In Mishima's book, this painting is the first thing he masturbates to. The main character of the novel, which people argue is a fictional autobiography of sorts, is drawn not just to the bodies of men, but to those bodies' destruction. For Kakshan, the erotic is horror, not because it is scary to be attracted to things, but because scary things are attractive. Innocence exists to be defiled. The ephebe is beautiful before war because the war will rend the ephebe's flesh. In the novel, the character identifies with the feminine. As reviewer John Pistelli puts it, he might like to play the woman or act out the woman in himself, but he could never have women as his sexual object choice. In traditional stereotypical gender sexual dynamics, submission is coded feminine, violence is coded masculine. Mishima was a masculine man who acted out the submissive destruction of Saint Sebastian. It is a merging of selves. Perhaps that is the ecstasy of the martyrdom of Sebastian. Portrait 3. Art's Sebastian. One of the oldest depictions of Saint Sebastian is this mosaic. In it, Sebastian is depicted as an old man. His face is kind of splotchy. He wears a lot of clothes. He has a beard. There's no erotic symbolism, at least not that speaks to me. The closest connections I can see to the Reni depictions are curly hair and eyes turned up toward God. This is assuredly non-erotic. It isn't really gay either. Contrast it with this version by Giovanni del Biondo, presented as the center canvas in a triptych. Sebastian here is not the youth of Reni's version, and still he's relatively hairless, though he does have a weird mustache. When I first saw this, I was tempted to say it too was non-erotic, but it's not really true, is it? Here Sebastian is surrounded by men, pierced over and over by their arrows, and he is dripping wet. Isn't this the symbology of what I'm going to euphemistically call a boot cake for the sake of YouTube? Is it possible to depict the pin cushioning of Sebastian without this erotic metaphor existing? Is his suffering always erotic? Put it in other words, that impossibly uncomfortable question that Mishima's repressed main character might put forward. Is it possible for suffering to ever be non-erotic? I've always found the paintings of Caravaggio to be dripping with a sort of eroticism, so it makes sense that the Saint Sebastian painting made by one of his followers, Cecco del Caravaggio, who the Met claims is Francesco Baroni, is equally erotic. In a way I'm sure an art historian could explain in better details, it reminds me a lot of Caravaggio's The Incredulity of St. Thomas. Both are curious violations of a man's chest by a group of other men. They combine interest with serenity, grace with horror. Both are a bit disgusting in a sort of beautiful way. As I was looking through depictions of Saint Sebastian, there was no chance I could mention disgusting versions of him without highlighting Salvador Dali. Dali, like Reni, has 3 versions that I want to talk about, though he might have some more that actually exist. I don't care about them. Let's talk about these 3 in chronological order. First up is Dali's 1942 ink drawing. Apologies that I have to censor this version. It's the first depiction I came across with Sebastian depicted in full nudity, which is apparently what actually happened in history. Coincidentally, it's also the only one to look as though he has body hair, with a full whorl over his stomach and chest. I'm going to be honest, I find this depiction thrilling. Like, truly and honestly, it's exhilarating and inspiring to look at it. There are dual navels. Saint Sebastian is depicted as inhuman. There are muscles in his chest that he lacks in his thin, hapless legs that dangle toward the ground but do not touch. We cannot see any rope binding him to the tree. We can't see his arms at all. In fact, it looks like his left arm has been kind of sliced away. The circle looks like a stump perfectly sheared. How is he connected to the tree, you wonder? Well, by being connected to the tree. Look at his right shin, ankle, and foot. It blends into the tree, blurring, merging. The dark shadow tracing his upper body removes any border between him and the tree. Sebastian is the tree. He is the wood. He is that which traps him and holds him. Where his head should be, there's this sort of demonic dandelion wisp of darkness. You can see eyes, a nose, and a smile. It's cute if you stare at it long enough. He is enjoying his own destruction. Maybe it's because this destruction allows him to retreat from his body. Look at the dark shadow. It's in the shape of a smaller body. There's a leg, a torso, a head, a neck, and an arm. This is Peter Pan. Sebastian's human form is desecrated as he moves to a new divinity. This is by and far my favorite of the Sebastian depictions we've looked at. I love it so much. In 1977, he painted this version of Saint Sebastian. It includes some typical aspects: pole of some sort, arrows of some sort, 2 arrows a la the one Reni painting, an arrow through the pit, an arm above the head. In this one, Sebastian isn't merely a shattering statue, he's kind of intersex, isn't he? His right breast is flat, presenting as a male nipple, but his left has a noticeable protrusion, similar to a female bust. It's placed right over Sebastian's heart, perhaps symbolic of the largesse of his compassion. There's also an egg at his center, around where his waist is. Most men don't have eggs. The white arrow seeking to pierce the egg is a clear analogy to straight intercourse. This is a depiction of conception. The egg is the only part of the painting that isn't shattering. The egg is a miracle. Dali knew, as many men before him, that true holiness is getting a submissive man pregnant. You just have to keep trying and firing arrows until you manage a miracle, the miracle of a saint. This painting transcends gender and sexuality. You can interpret it another way. The body is merely a shell for the egg, the soul, which lies at our center. It is white and pure, and though it will be targeted, it will not be broken. This world is a false world. Our bodies will crumble and fall just as our buildings and our statues will. Only our souls will remain. No matter the harm done to us, our souls will remain. It's based on a statue by Polykleitos of Argos called Wounded Amazon. If you look at that statue, the painting is remarkably similar. Female and male combining. I find Dali's 82 artwork to be the least interesting of the 3. The textures surrounding Sebastian are kind of intriguing, like he's projecting some sort of cosmic energy from his corpse. There's an arrow in his head, so he's probably dead. His body is all sorts of wrong and broken, twisted. The crutches holding him up are an interesting change in how Sebastian is depicted from most versions. Look how his chest stretches. It's almost like it's made out of the plating of some keratinous insect. The detail on his loincloth is somewhat suggestive, but in a more grotesque way than the Reni paintings. It looks more like a fetus growing in his thigh, as though he is Zeus pregnant with Dionysus. This growth of life might be what twists his body so and rids him of his humanity. Is this new life, or is this Dali revisiting the 42 idea with Sebastian fleeing death into a new form, reborn, much the same way Dionysus would be reborn? Is he cast as a fertility god in Dali's imagination? Sebastian continually represents a sort of femininity held within the masculine. Perhaps he's divine because he transcends traditional assumptions about masculinity and sexuality. Sounds then like we need to talk about drag queens. But first, artists did not make Saint Sebastian up, so I guess it's time we look at who Sebastian actually was. 4. History Sebastian. Sebastian was a Roman officer under Emperor Diocletian and a secret Christian who would secretly visit and encourage Christian men. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I like how I only winked once when I said wink, wink. When Diocletian discovered Sebastian's religion, he was ordered murdered. A bunch of guys grabbed him, stripped him nude, so Reni's little loincloth was inaccurate, tied him to a tree, pincushioned him with arrows in spots that wouldn't kill him so that he could die slowly from blood loss. Horrible way to die. They left him there. His friends saw him and were like, oh, hell nah, and took him to a Christian doctor lady who got him back to health. Rather than take this all as a cosmic sign to disappear and live the good life, he decided he was not content with getting killed by one Roman emperor. He needed the hat trick. So he went over to the West and said, yo, Maximian, you should be nicer to the Christians. Maxi was all, oh my god, you were scared of me. And mistaking him for a zombie, ordered his men, beat this man to death. And so they did. Now, which emperor actually did what is apparently up to debate. The Membrera says it was Dio, then Maxi. Wikipedia says it was both Dio. So I went looking and there's a Saint Sebastian Catholic Church that implies both were Maxi. So really, who's to say? Sebastian would go on to be one of a few plague saints. Apparently, his saintly form helped end a plague in Italy in 680. I don't really get it because I'm not religious, but like, good for him. It also happens that arrows have been historically associated with plague. Sebastian filled with arrows did not die. Sebastian filled with plague did not die. He became a symbol of hope against sickness. According to Membrera, Saint Sebastian fell out of fashion from the 1700s to the 1800s, so unfortunately no, Miku binder Thomas Jefferson did not likely paint a submissive uwu Saint Sebastian scene. This changes in the 1900s when he returns strongly because his image is associated with eroticism and homoeroticism, considered by many intellectuals and groups a gay icon. Portrait 5. Gay Sebastian. Do you know how we know Saint Sebastian is a queer icon? In 1911, he was the subject of a play, La Martyrdom de Saint Sebastian, by Gabriel D'Annunzio. That's less important than the fact that the musical for the play was composed by the gay composer Claude of the Boy Butt. Claude Debussy. In it, Sebastian was played by Ida Rubinstein, and we all know the true height of gay icon status is being a talented female. But how did he get here? Well, it turns out gay guys like handsome men. I know, this is shocking. But we have to ask why he's depicted as a beautiful young man in so much art. It isn't simply because all artists are horny and gay, though obviously that's part of it. Here's what Stefan Gortz says about it. Sebastian begins to appear as a young, beardless, and unclothed man, since the armor of the soldier would have stopped the arrows. As soon as the scene of the first martyrdom comes into focus, Sebastian has to undress, becoming a beautiful youth. In this way, he embodies the hope of a wholesome body that the plague cannot overcome. In addition, the contemplation of beautiful things was thought to form a kind of medicine that strengthened the defenses against disease. Because Sebastian passively endured the arrows and passivity was connoted with femininity, Sebastian acquires traditionally feminine features, curly hair, and red cheeks. Sebastian could only become a proper symbol of hope for the Christian world through becoming a beautiful, nearly nude young man who found a passive ecstasy in pain and submission to other men. This was how you survived the plague. From there, it really was just sexual attraction. Church officials grew concerned about the sensuality of the Sebastian paintings. Mishima had his awakening, but so too did Charles Kingsley's Alton Locke, who suddenly understood how pictures of beautiful men could excite women the same way pictures of beautiful women could excite men. Oscar Wilde found him beautiful, and in his defiance of gendered expectation, in his beauty, in his pleasure of martyrdom, not merely erotic, but symbolic of all who defy the ways of the world. That was it. Sebastian became a symbol for non-typical sexuality. We claimed him. As Art UK points out, and I didn't connect until I read this, the story of the martyr is a coming out story. He comes out as Christian to the Romans and is subsequently killed for it. Yet it's only by coming out that he can be a holy saint. So it is only by being ourselves, by being queer no matter how the world views us, that we LGBT people can be holy. The closet is no place of goodness. Surely if there is a God, they know this. Derek Jarman was a filmmaker in the late 20th century who loves making his classics delightfully gay. I mean, Tilda Swinton is in Edward II, and there's little gayer than a movie starring Tilda Swinton. We need to talk about Kevin. Wasn't really gay, and in my opinion, wasn't really great, but it had Tilda Swinton, so it was gay. Jarman's debut film, shot entirely in Latin because he was insane, was Sebastiane, a reimagining of the Saint Sebastian story. It was entirely queer. Criterion says of the film, through erotic feature, the film turns the male gaze upon itself, gloriously photographing the male form, inspiring an entire generation of LGBT filmmakers. This is a touchstone for a movement and a touchstone for cinema as an entity. Gay Celluloid says, no work of this era arrived with such outright pride, let alone overt homosexual content as to the lack of Sebastiane. Sebastian was not only a lighthouse for queer identity and awakening, he helped shape the entirety of American queer cinema. Derek Jarman tragically died of AIDS. I don't think that you can talk about the importance of Saint Sebastian to the gay community without talking about the AIDS crisis. Perhaps it didn't come up in many of the things I read for this video because his place in the queer community was already well established by then, yet still, Saint Sebastian is a saint meant to defend against the plague. He was peppered with arrows, and yet his most famous depictions did not have him gushing blood. He looked up in exaltation and pleasure. He had a youthful, beautiful form. His suffering was holy. Sebastian survived his plague. In this icon, there was hope. Perhaps the sick could survive. Perhaps they could be beautiful. Perhaps they could be holy. Perhaps things could improve. Perhaps there's a heaven waiting for us where all the suffering will mean nothing. Oh God, do not desert us. Oh God, we cast our eyes to heaven with our lips spread apart in a moan of mixed pleasure and pain, and a cry of exultation. Oh God, save us. Oh God, have mercy. Oh God, was I a good boy? Was I a good boy? Was I good? When I was younger, I got annoyed by all the talk and focus on AIDS, and now I can barely think about it without getting upset. It's heavy. It's so heavy. So let's talk about something a little lighter. Let's talk about drag. On season 10, episode 3 of RuPaul's Drag Race, the runway theme was feathers. Shoot. Eventual winner Aquaria wore what she described as a cross between Saint Sebastian and a wounded bird. The bird is, of course, white. She's covered in white feathers, and she's crying bloody tears. The focus on Sebastian's eyes is here. There are the bloody arrows. As with the Reni paintings, the more innocent Sebastian is, the more violence must be visited upon him. Aquaria is dressed in all white with soft white feathers. She isn't merely a wounded bird. She's an angel shot through. She is the saint covered in gore. She is innocence defiled. This isn't merely Saint Sebastian the figure. This is Guido Reni's Saint Sebastian as a drag queen. This is the entire concept of what Sebastian means to the queer community, especially as she maintains her innocence and poise as she walks the runway. This is defiance. There's something so special about a drag queen portraying Sebastian. As we noted, Sebastian had to become more feminine in his depictions in order to portray the ecstasy of martyrdom, in order to inspire hope in plague victims. And Ali, Sebastian blended with the female. He transcended gender. Aquaria is a guy dressed in femme drag representing Saint Sebastian. Hell yeah. On Drag Race UK versus the World Season 2, eventual winner Tia Coffee dressed as Saint Sebastian for the business in the front, party in the back runway. And, there's like a new Drag Race anti-curse for you, green gay, drag detective, etc., etc. A queen who pulls off a Saint Sebastian look is going to win their season. On the back of her gorgeous gown is a white train covered in red jewels of blood. Arrows stick out of her. The white was necessary for the whole innocent corruption of the martyr thing, and it looks nice, but what if there's more? How is getting shot with a bunch of arrows a party? Tia jokes on Instagram that the party was murder, but doesn't this play more into the erotic associations of Saint Sebastian? Her backside has been filled with phallic images stuck in a river of white. And that is a party. Drag King Orlando did a recreation of Giovanni Battista Scima's Saint Sebastian for the National Gallery. From the choice of blue for the loincloth, pretty inspired, but I feel like a drag king portraying Sebastian elevates the concept even further than a drag queen. It's the feminine becoming masculine, becoming feminine. The tape over Orlando's breasts only makes me think. The Heritage Foundation, authors of Project 2025, have made it clear they want conservatives in the United States to criminalize trans existence, to criminalize reference to trans people. Bigotry against trans people has been increasing in salience over the last half-decade as of time of recording. I expect then, for Saint Sebastian, the queer saint who survives plagues and prosecution, whose defiance, whose dare to be himself in spite of a hateful world, will rise as a trans icon. We will see trans Sebastian on stage and on film, and it'll be beautiful and haunting and sad and innocent and sexy and wonderful. I'd like to leave you on that note, but there is one last thing I think I should bring up about the popularity of Sebastian as a symbol of the erotic. And talking about Mishima's sexually violent and melancholic novel, Pistelli writes, "Insofar as Brown's point is that women and gay men now publish acclaimed books as erotically provocative as those heralded by the straight men of yore, can't we consider this as evidence that all readers appreciate a reflection of sexuality's insurgent and eruptive quality, the way it confronts us with parts of ourselves, our aggression or submissiveness, our inexplicable fetishes, even our obscure, fantastical wish to harm or be harmed or look upon harm, that we'd rather not show to the world, that we keep behind the mask of propriety or the mask of art." Saint Sebastian endures, because all, not merely we gays, find something powerful in the pleasure of pain. We like erotic horror because it's the sort of erotica that truly speaks to the parts of ourselves we feel loneliest and most ill at ease with. There are groups out there who are too scared of this part of humanity and believe destroying its depiction will erase it from our cores. They long to make lonely islands out of people. They long to ban the erotic, and especially the disturbing erotic. They do not want anyone ever to have to sit with the uncomfortability of arousal at Reni Saint Sebastian. They are fools and enemies of art. If we let them win, we lose not only free speech and not only art, not only sex. We lose Saint Sebastian, and when he is gone, we have lost all hope. Howdy, and thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, share if you're feeling saucy. You can join me over on Patreon if you would like, wherein you'll get these videos and others early. You'll also get to have some fun behind the scenes access to some of my art projects, some more personal vlogging style content, and you'll just get to support me and we'll get to chat about art a whole bunch, which is what I love to do most. You can go over to Amazon Smashwords or wherever you get your ebooks and purchase a copy of my poetry collections, Butterfly Snuff and A Museum of Art in Eggs, both of which are also available in paperback and hardback. I have a second channel where I'm just reading through a bunch of public domain stuff for the fun of it and through my own work. So you'll get readings of these poetry collections and some short stories and some longer form fiction when I get around to it, and some plays. And I have a third channel where I'm uploading my music and art instead of having it all clog up this channel. So go support those if you feel like it. That content, a lot of it will also be getting uploaded early to Patreon. So if you want all of my stuff in one convenient space, Patreon is the place to go, which would be really cool of you, you know? I hope you have a fantastic day. Do not be rude in the comments. Do not go and harass anybody. And I will see you next time.